Our top focus on the United States. We're now learning that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to launch his presidential nomination in a few hours from now. He shall be launching his campaign in a live with Tesla CEO Elon Musk. Now, DeSantis has gathered quite a sizable number of donors from Miami. Meanwhile, Casey DeSantis, the Florida governor's wife, has posted a video on Twitter which features her husband hinting at his campaign launch. Not to forget, DeSantis too will be making this grand announcement on Twitter. Let's also have a quick look at few of the reactions that have come in from political experts on this.
He's going to make the argument that he is as conservative as Donald Trump, but that he has no baggage, that he is somebody who's been a successful governor, been reelected with a wide margin in a very competitive electoral state, and that he has moved the conservative social agenda forward in Florida, and that he'll do the same thing nationwide. Ron DeSantis' core appeal is that he's not Donald Trump, and that appeals to 65% of the Republican Party. 35% will vote for Trump no matter what, but the rest of the party is open and up for grabs. So Ron DeSantis assumes that's his base, but to win the general election, this is the really big question mark. He's got to not only win over Republican voters, he's got to win over people who will say, you will do better than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump likes to cite the fact that he's gotten more votes than any Republican candidate in the history of American politics as we've been keeping records. So how does he make the argument that he's going to win as many votes as Donald Trump? And so far, Ron DeSantis hasn't had enough coverage and been able to be in people's, living rooms, so to speak, on television. So we don't know if he has the charisma and the force and the camera attractiveness to really make an impression on voters, and we're about to find out.
DeSantis has both legislative and executive experience. He's also served in the military, which is an increasingly rare trait among our presidents these days, and I think a welcome one. So I think he has plenty of experience, certainly comparable to George W. Bush, Bill Clinton. All these people had been governors beforehand, and I think having that legislative experience is an additional benefit.
So while those political experts have made some very significant points, let's also try and find out what our guests today have to say. And for that, let me introduce my panelists. I'm joined in by Kimberly Leonard, who is a political journalist from Insider, Corinne Clark, who's a Republican strategist, and Lauren Harper, who's a Democrat strategist. All three of these wonderful ladies are joining me live tonight. Thank you so much, women, for joining in. Kimberly, if I may begin with you, it's the first time such an announcement will be made on a platform like Twitter. Why Twitter, first of all?
Well, it's really showing this trend about, where people's eyeballs are and how the media is really changing. It definitely was unexpected. But when I think about it, maybe it should have been expected a little bit more. You had Tucker Carlson get kicked out of Fox News and then announcing that he would be doing his new show on Twitter. So it does seem like there's an appetite to sort of switch things up and reach a broader audience. And just to sort of add to that, yes, he's kicking off on Twitter, but then he's doing a radio show, then he'll be on Fox News. I understand he'll do a teletown hall as well. So it does seem like it's more of a media blitz than maybe we were led to initially believe.
What does it speak of Twitter's political leaning under Elon Musk, even though he's in the past, of course, segregated himself from any sort of Republican inclination, but it's only getting clearer by the day.
Yeah, well, Musk had previously said that he would endorse Ron DeSantis, but yesterday in front of a Wall Street Journal audience, he said that he would actually remain neutral in the race. So that was kind of interesting. It was a turnaround from what he said about a year ago.
Right. All right, Corinne, if I could bring you in. The pro-Trump groups for Make America Great Again are slamming this campaign launch, calling it being out of touch. Will DeSantis be able to match up to Donald Trump's political outreach with both anti-Trump Republicans and even the pro-Trump supporters?
I think the uphill battle for Ron DeSantis really is in the primary here. He has to somehow overcome the Trump charisma and the Trump base that is very active in the primary. And I love when politicians do something unexpected and embrace new platforms like this Twitter Spaces. But for a primary announcement, I think it might have missed the mark here because we're looking at a certain demographic of voters that is just so reliable. And those are not exactly the same people that are super hyped up about a new Twitter space. I also think it's an interesting move for DeSantis to take it to Twitter Space, which is an audio only platform, when I think one of his greatest strengths is that he has the visual of being a much younger candidate than Joe Biden or even Donald Trump. So it's interesting to me that he would make this announcement an audio only. I think that's a missed opportunity.
All right. Lauren, you heard what Corinne has to say. Also, how do you view the timing of DeSantis' possible announcement? Will DeSantis be able to shake up a contest that has so far been largely one-sided from the GOP? And you know I'm talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how DeSantis's approval either increases or continues to decrease. He has dropped double digits from the initial polling that was done between whether voters were going to choose Trump or DeSantis. Many Americans, actually 46% of Americans, when they're polled about it, they believe that Florida is a less safe state than their own communities, right? And increasingly, 52% of independent voters perceive Florida to be less safe than their own communities, right? So when you talk about crime, which is such a critical issue for not only primary voters but general election voters, among again the independent voters who would determine the election, he's not exactly performing very well among those voters. Whereas President Biden is actually making gains with independent voters on his stances on things like the DC crime bill.
Right, Kimberly. The pre-launch momentum, let's talk about it. There are two pieces of news stories that I read which may impact this pre-launch momentum of DeSantis. One, of course, is Disney's cancellation of a $1 billion office campus plan. Has the governor's bitter feud with Disney influenced Floridans and Americans? Not to forget pro-advocacy groups like the NAACP. They are advocating African Americans to beware while traveling to Florida. They're saying they've in fact issued a travel advisory which is warning African Americans, saying that Florida is openly hostile. How will this now impact DeSantis?
Well, it's definitely going to be used by his adversaries. I don't think it'll be used as much by Republican adversaries when it comes to talking about some of the wars that Governor DeSantis has waged against LGBTQ groups, or, looking at how diversity gets taught in workplaces and in schools. And so I think more what we'll see Republicans talk about, and what we have already, is really the Disney fight, because what DeSantis is doing with Disney, a lot of Republicans see as completely, antithetical to what the Republican Party has been about, which is essentially boosting big business, being all about the free market, not punishing companies for speaking out. Generally Republicans give very big tax breaks to companies, and Disney has enjoyed a ton of tax breaks and perks in Florida that other companies don't get. So DeSantis does have a challenge in front of him. I think we still need to see the latest polling on it, but he does have a challenge in terms of explaining why he thinks this is a worthwhile fight, because it might come across as super petty. And also, Disney is very, very good at public relations, and they are going to keep punching back, and they're going to keep doing it in like their cutesy Disney way that is going to be hard for the governor to push back on.
Absolutely. Lauren, if I could bring you in on this bit, do you think that the American voter will feel, especially the Floridans, that they are paying the cost of this feud between Disney and DeSantis?
Oh, certainly. Taxpayers always want to know how is this affecting my wallet in terms of your litigation purposes, right? I can't imagine, as Corinne said, I can't imagine any Republican voter being okay with a serious presidential candidate on the Republican side pushing away American-owned businesses, right? This is not something that we necessarily identify with on the Republican side as a candidate who is anti-big business. So again, it's going to be difficult for, I think, a lot of us to grasp that DeSantis thinks that he can succeed with a GOP primary voter when he is not necessarily pro-American business.
Right. Corinne, even an ultra-conservative Donald Trump has criticized DeSantis' 6-week abortion ban in Florida. He called it too harsh, something to which DeSantis shot back, saying he was proud to do it. Do you view DeSantis now posturing himself as further right of Trump, that too on issues like abortion, gun control, even immigration?
I don't see him on further right on
Absolutely.
all of those issues. I certainly think that Donald Trump has the upper hand on immigration. He appointed the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade. He is strong on life issues. I think DeSantis made a good move, which is Trump called him out for signing a policy and DeSantis did not back down. That is probably the smartest move. No one wants a wishy-washy candidate, and DeSantis is going to have to stand by his record if he wants to see any movement in this primary. I do think what is difficult here is that this is not DeSantis versus Biden. This race is not DeSantis versus Biden. If we're going against crime, on immigration, on taxes, on the culture war, DeSantis is crushing Biden on all of those issues. But that's not who he's against right now. Who he has to run against is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is strong on all of those issues. And then he has a much better outreach campaign. He's connecting with voters a lot more. And no one fills a stadium like Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis has to overcome that. This isn't an issues battle between him and Joe Biden, or it would be an easy cakewalk for him.
Kimberly, I think Corinne's made a very valid observation over there. How do you view that observation? Because, so far we've also been learning how Donald Trump's legal woes have not really acted as an impediment when it comes to the charisma that he is sort of commanding with the pro-Trump voters. Having said that, will DeSantis be able to break that ceiling?
Well, that's his biggest task ahead of him. And I think that we'll know very early on. I think maybe 30 to 60 days, we'll have a really good sense as to whether he can do this. And yes, it is amazing what Trump has been able to do. It's something that other candidates really can't manage in the same way. Here he is in the middle of this indictment. Here he is, convicted of sexual assault, and yet he's going up in the polls. Now, he has used the last few months very wisely against DeSantis. He's had Floridian politicians endorse him. He has gone after DeSantis on all kinds of things, from his social skills or lack thereof to how he eats, his voting record on cutting Medicare and Social Security. And so he has been very disciplined, which is kind of, not usually what we see from Trump. He kind of, is more freewheeling, but we see a new campaign here, I would say, than the one that we saw in 2020, where everything is very, very on message and planned. So I don't know. I'm interested to see what he does tonight. I think that a lot of people are speculating that he might choose this time to return to Twitter. And so if he were to do that, that would certainly suck up a lot of the oxygen in the room.
Right. Lauren, let's talk about DeSantis's posturing. Of course, Corinne did not agree that he's trying to posture himself as further right of Donald Trump. But I can't help but focus on the NAACP travel advisory. It's talked about DeSantis making very fierce efforts to sort of wipe out Black history. They've also talked about Florida's hostile attitude towards African American. One can't help but focus on that travel advisory, and that is why I will also talk about immigration and even gun control, because it does seem like somebody who is deliberately posturing himself like that.
Yeah, it's genuinely concerning, right? Not only when it comes to Black Americans and the history of the reality of America as a nation, but also, like you said, for immigration, and even like you just mentioned with abortion and even LGBTQ rights, right? So, America is generally a center and center-right nation. So if DeSantis is going to the right of Trump, then I can't imagine how he could, again, pick up the primary voters that he's going to need to win, on top of the independent voters and general election voters that he's going to need to be able to be a serious contender for the presidency. And so, very, very unappealing in terms of candidacy, in my opinion, but this seems to be the approach that he's taking.
All right. Kimberly, I'd like to have closing thoughts from you. I know that, as far as challenges are concerned, Donald Trump, as Corinne rightly highlighted, is the first and foremost challenge of Ron DeSantis at the moment. But I'm sure you'll agree that these challenges go beyond Donald Trump.
Well, of course, I think that people are also thinking not just about, whether they want Donald Trump back in the White House, but I think a lot of Republican voters are also thinking about whether he can win. He did already lose in 2020, and presumably he'll go up against Joe Biden. And are they really going to set him up to lose against Joe Biden once again? So I do think that there's something going on with that as well. You know, it's going to be a long primary season. I think that's going to be something people are thinking about a lot. And I think age is going to be a big factor. You know, Biden is more advanced in age. And so if he's up against Trump, it makes them seem a little bit more similar. But let's say he's up against Ron DeSantis, who would be 45 at the time of the election, the differences will be a lot more stark. So these are just sort of outside factors that'll weigh in, not to mention potentially a recession. So all of these things are big unknowns, I think.
Absolutely. Corinne, if I could end with your thoughts, I'm sure there is place for a Trump alternative. Will that be DeSantis or not?
I think if there was going to be an alternative to Trump, it would be Ron DeSantis. He's the only one that is pulling any numbers, even remotely on the map right now. But I do not think that he has what it takes, and he doesn't have the outreach campaign to actually challenge Trump. And I think Trump is going to run away with this primary. It's very unfortunate to me. I did not want to see the race come down to this, but Trump does a primary unlike anyone else. And we watched him in 2016 wipe out 16 candidates, all of which were wholly qualified for office. And now Donald Trump has only one to wipe out, and that's going to be Ron DeSantis. And I don't think it's going to be pretty.
All right. Lauren, how do you view the age argument? Because remember, Biden versus Trump, now we have a third contender, and he certainly beats them as far as the age factor is concerned.
Oh, absolutely. You know, in terms of age, you know, Americans are not necessarily incredibly stoked about two possible contenders, Biden and Trump, who are, you know, in their late 70s, early 80s. However, America has also, one, never elected a president from Florida, nor have they ever elected a president as short as Ron DeSantis. So there's all sorts of factors that we have to take into consideration here, and that's just one of them.
Very interesting observations over there. Many thanks to you, Lauren, Corinne, and Kimberly for joining in on this discussion. Thoroughly appreciate those inputs.